everyone. So thank you for sticking around. We're about to do the final panel discussion of the day, which is on minimalist interior maximum risk, designing for distraction-free driving. So we've got a super interesting lineup of panelists here. My name's Tiana. I work as a journalist for Future Transport News. So come talk to me at any point. I'll also be covering coverage from the event. I'll let each of our panelists introduce themselves, say who they are, where they're from, and their relevance to this panel. So starting on my left.
Hi, I'm Michael Neese. I'm a professor of psychology at Lafayette College in Easton, Pennsylvania. My background is in human factors and engineering psychology, and I study humans and technology, human automation interaction, and auditory displays in vehicles.
My name is Grigory Maestrenko. I'm a principal engineer for Filament Labs at Mitsubishi Electric, and we are working on studying distractions and developing mitigations.
Hi everyone, my name is Anshika Chaudhary. I work at Ford Motor Company as a senior driver distraction specialist, and my background is in mechanical engineering, human factors, and I'm doing my MBA too. And at Ford, I work in a lot of in-vehicle validation, compliance testing, a lot of NHTSA driver distraction testing too.
Hi everyone, I'm Fabiano. I work for Bosch for more than 20 years, and my current role is product manager for interior sensing solutions.
Hello guys, my name is Jorge Reinaga. I work for Cirrus Logic. I work as an applications manager for our haptic products, and my team supports OEMs and tier ones to enable haptics in vehicles.
Great. So obviously we've got quite a large panel here, so hopefully it will turn into quite an open discussion. If anyone else has any questions at any point, please feel free to raise your hand and we'll fit them in if we can. If not, we'll also try and have some time for some question and answer specifically at the end. But I would like to start off by asking the panelists, as vehicle interiors evolve, what shift is taking place from physical buttons to touchscreens, and what do you think the implications on safety are? Yeah, go for it.
Okay. So definitely there is an automotive landscape shift that has been happening, and shift is massive. We have noticed that back in the day, we used to have a sea of controls, sea of physical controls, from thumb wheels to rocker switches, and there were so many physical controls in your interior. Now that shift has happened. Most of these controls are now housed in the touchscreen, and it's just that we need to be a lot more aware that what kind of controls are housed within the touchscreen. And we've been noticing that some automakers are also taking a bit of a hybrid approach, that certain critical controls that are most frequently used while driving, they are still kept as hard controls, whereas your least used controls or features are housed within the touchscreen. And there are so many reasons that I can think of that why there is a shift that is happening, is because from a customer's point of view, if most things are in the touchscreens can give a feel of a premium or a luxury vehicle, give that aesthetic modern look. But from an automaker's perspective, why the shift is happening is also because user customization is a very big factor. You can update a lot of features using OTA as well, whereas redoing the entire physical retooling work and applying that to different trim and vehicles adds to your cost, it adds to your complexity. So these are some of the reasons that we have been noticing, and implications are significant, definitely, and we do need to strike a balance to make sure that all the controls that are housed within the touchscreen are still safe to use while driving. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I can add to your point. Less than 20 years ago, we saw this shift on the mobile world. We had haptic buttons, and then the industry shifted towards using touchscreen, not just because touch screens became more affordable, but because also it was more convenient. And we saw that the market resisted at the very beginning, but then slowly but surely, market started switching, only because there is so much more you can do with a touchscreen than with the physical buttons. I believe we are at about the same stage in automotive as well. And market resists to the change. We are claiming physical buttons are more convenient just because we are used where they are. But when we think that buttons can actually be contextual, we can change the buttons, we can change their meaning when we are talking about SDVs in particular. There's so much more behind this. In the next years, we will see much more. And also touch screens don't have to be limited by the displays we use in the car. We see touch panels used for buttons underneath the displays and even on steering wheels. Some concept cars demonstrate the touch panels on the dashboard, on the top, and some Chinese cars also have touch screens or panels in the ceiling as well integrated. And this is just the first step, I believe. We also have right now voice assistants, not like it was 10 years ago, but today they're smart. They recognize natural speech. And it's not only about the touch screens, it's also about other means of HMI to interact with the users. And of course, it's very convenient for us to use the tools that we all know, but it's also very important to learn new things. And even if it feels complicated at first, it becomes more beneficial and easier to use in the future.
One thing I have to add is, as an end user, for us, it's normally easy to oversimplify that, okay, OEMs want to save costs. It's a lot cheaper to have all of these controls on a display or something. I love that you brought this perspective, especially the OTA one. It's something that hadn't occurred as often to me. I mean, there is a lot more than just the costs involved. It's also, I mean, brings the possibility to update and when the controls are.
Yeah, one of the things that maybe can improve some of this development of new displays is adding haptics to it. A lot of the applications today do not have feedback, so they just have touch controls, but the user don't know if the actual information have been acknowledged by the system. So by adding haptics, you can actually let the user know that control have been enabled, and they can be less distracted by looking at display, and they can be looking at the road when they're driving. So that's an improvement that can be made into the displays today.
I completely agree with that, because when you go from the switch to tactile and physical controls to a touchscreen control without any haptic feedback, you're basically inducing a visual search to find the right function on the screen, which requires eyes off the road. And so you're also removing the possibility for sort of tactile and touch feedback about which control you're activating. And so that's inducing people to take their eyes off the road to interact with that touch screen. I would also say I agree that the flexibility of touch screens is a plus, right? You can be controlling one function at one moment in time, and the next moment in time it's controlling something totally different. From the kind of human factors and safety perspective, the counter to that is the potential for mode confusion, where people aren't sure what mode the screen is in as they're reaching over for it, because at one point in time it was controlling one set of functions, and now it's controlling something different, and they forget what kind of mode they're working with.
So haptics is obviously a really great point, and you've mentioned it needs to address this challenge of ensuring the drivers aren't distracted by the touchscreens. Is there anything else the industry is doing to address this challenge? Any kind of research into human factors or anything like that that we're proactively doing to ensure that the interiors of cars are still safe?
I know some of the research shows that people have experimented with different sort of, if you're talking about, for example, plugging your mobile device into the touch screen, reducing the functionality and having a sort of different mobile interface for in the car, and they have implemented those with some success. I think it's also the case that the literature shows reducing the number of buttons is helpful that are available at a given time, because again, you're inducing a visual search, and if you have to search for your selection amongst 6 or 8 different selections, that's a lot more visually time-consuming, eyes off the road, than if you're only choosing between 1 or 2 or 3 options.
Maybe another one that I have to add is where kind of my experience is mostly is that now we have other modalities of sensors for other purposes, like driver monitoring for distraction or drowsiness. So we know where the eyes are. We have a gaze tracking at any moment. We can use that information to improve the experience, and because we know if the driver is really paying attention or not at any point while interacting with the HMI.
Yeah, and I think you can also use that information to see if the user is spending too much time looking at the display or other surfaces, and maybe provide a notification either through audio or through notifications through the car seat itself. Because the user will be able to understand that they're distracted and be able to react and look at the road rather than looking at the displays.
From an automaker's perspective, I've noticed there are a lot of solutions that are out there in order to keep your drivers safe when they are interacting with these secondary tasks. And a couple of things come to my mind, like NHTSA driver distraction have their guidelines, although they are voluntary, but some automakers do adopt and they do make sure a lot of secondary task interactions are following the glance time as per what NHTSA has defined. And other regulatory bodies such as Euro NCAP, they have also mentioned, like a recent article that I was going through says that starting 2026, all European cars should make sure that certain controls must be physical, and such as your horn, your windshield wiper, SOS, hazard lights, they must be hard controls in order to maintain that NCAP rating. And along with that, like even FMVSS, we do notice that if certain critical controls are housed within the touchscreen, they have to be persistent. So we have like a lot of guidelines out there that sort of guides the automakers in order to make sure while a driver is engaging with these secondary tasks, they are safe at the same time.
To what extent do each of you think that multimodal interfaces like audio, voice detection, that kind of thing will come into play here and maybe take away some of the visual touchscreen tasks? Do you think that's a possibility or not?
Of course.
Yeah?
Of course there is a possibility. It's a very important topic about the voice assistance. And we say when you look at the display and you try to figure out which button you need to press, and the more you're familiar with the UI, the easier it gets for you to choose a function. So you basically don't get distracted. It's just easy. Within a fraction of a second, you know where to press, you tap the button, and you move on. Sometimes, especially when you're not too familiar with the UI, and with something new like pop-up messages, which may, during navigation, which may cover important information in the screen, you get distracted by deciding what's more important right now. Is it the message that popped up? Or is it the navigation information that I need? Maybe there is a very complicated intersection just in front of me and I'm not familiar with the area and I need to do something. So it takes time to process the information. So in those cases, of course, we can use an advantage of the voice interaction. So the driver can stay focused on the road or driving in general, while we can still ask if the driver wants to read it. Combining the two may actually distract the driver more than just asking. Because you still need to, when we just ask but also show the balloon with the coming up message, the driver will naturally want to confirm if the driver wants to read that message. And also, it also depends on the context when maybe the driver is not alone in the car. So there is this privacy issue as well. But when you just suggest using the voice controls and the driver says, no, not now, or maybe later, remind me like in a couple hours, that will mitigate the risk.
I like where you're going. I was having my thoughts, and I think we had this conversation for a little bit. I think at some point we'll be faced with one of two options. Either we try to prevent that people start trying to use the car or whatever they get from their smartphones when they're driving, and say, okay, we have to put, like you mentioned, the regulation, it's looking for more physical buttons or going back to physical buttons. For me, this is going in one direction, which is let's prevent that people act differently. We need the traditional way of driving and using physical buttons. Or the other option would be let's accept that people expect to have up to a limited point access to the things that they have on their smartphones while they're driving. And how can we use these multimodal sensors and other technologies to allow this at least to a certain extent? Yeah.
Yeah, there was a recent meta-analysis that was published that examined, and a meta-analysis is like an evidence synthesis technique that takes into account findings across lots of different experimental studies, and found that basically auditory voice interaction was still more distracting than baseline driving with no interaction, but less distracting than visual manual interactions. And so I think we might be looking a bit of incrementalism with safety and thinking about that balance as you described between not enabling people to do completely unsafe things, but taking into account the things they want to do and trying to find the safest ways that they can do those things, given that they're going to do them anyway, and it's not reasonable to expect that the person is not going to engage in some of these non-driving related activities or engage with these information systems as they drive.
Yeah, I feel like multimodal technologies, if executed and implemented well, can work in the favor of the driver and help you accomplish a lot of tasks with ease. And just like, making sure your voice is working in a natural, in a reliable way. It is able to sense what exactly the driver is commanding, whether it's just setting up a destination or finding a charger on your route. So, and along with that, haptic, I think as my panelists, everybody else has been saying the same, having good haptic controls, that click sound, and as soon as you're reaching the target, you have that haptic feedback so that you don't have to take your eyes off the road in order to really double check that have you really clicked that button. So these are some of the modalities along with gaze tracking. If you want, you can throw gestures, gesture tracking in the mix if executed well, and also making sure that accidental activation should not occur. So there is like a very fine line between accidental activation and actually what you're really trying to tell to the system. Also making sure that, if you have a passenger along with you, are they also engaging with gestures? So if all these different modalities are in synergy, I do feel that, driver HMI interaction can be very much safer.
Maybe to add to that, I think the voice control maybe is useful for the passengers in the vehicle that maybe don't have access to the display or the smart surfaces on the steering wheel. But I think for the driver itself, those critical functions that can impact safety, they should be accessible by touch rather than voice. I think. It depends
you don't
on
want the kid in the back to be like, oh, turn the car, indicate, and then the car indicates, and then,
Yeah, I think the standards explicitly say you cannot use voice control for any sort of lateral or longitudinal control of the vehicle, which makes a lot of sense, right?
Yeah, that does. Yeah. So how do you guys feel once, obviously, partial automation, level 2, level 3 is thrown into the mix here? Does this kind of increase the risks associated with distraction when interacting with the HMI, or does it actually enable all these other things you want to talk about and you want the driver to be able to do?
Actually, it's a very complicated and complex thing and very critical for the driver and the automaker too. And if done correctly by the automaker, that is one part. The other part is that does the driver understand its capabilities and limitations too? So the onus is sort of shared between both the driver and the automakers. And even let's say that we throw automation within the system, you have LKS, adaptive cruise control is on, that does take off certain burden from the driver, and that helps them engage in some brief interactions with the HMI. But then at the same time, a very big challenge that I feel is that how will you make sure that driver's response or reaction time is less in case of a emergency situation that appears on the road, and we want the driver to take back that control. So making sure the reaction time is not compromised is also very important. There are some examples, like recently I read that BMW has L3 personal pilot. That was very, very interesting. I read in one of the articles that in very strict driving conditions, like I think up to 60 kilometers per hour, when this automation L3 is engaged, driver can interact with the HMI a lot more deeper. They can go through emails, stream videos, etc. But again, I have not experienced it. I hope I do. But these are some of the things that we are noticing now are coming up.
Yeah, I like that comment. I was also having this thought, and I think I learned that from you. I mean, that we have this lower speeds. And I mentioned that we have more information about the driver or the interior of the cabin, but we also have a lot more information, especially when we talk about level 2 plus, of the exterior. So to your question, I think at this moment where we still have some mode confusion and it's relatively new to most end users, it can drive even more distraction. But on the other hand, we're also getting a lot more information with the ADAS advanced driver assistance systems about what's going on in the exterior, and we can allow not only based on speed, but on traffic situation. It's less busy, or it's a traffic jam. The car knows it's a traffic jam. So couldn't I allow the driver now to interact a bit more? And that could be a reward so that the driver will also accept when he's not allowed to operate or certain features. Yeah.
I think it's a very important point to identify, just to add to your point, how to identify if the driver is allowed to drive or not. And the sensing system has to be very sophisticated to judge if it is allowed. For this purpose, we need to know not what is going on with the driver, but also what's going on outside of the car. Other cars, what they are doing, how they drive. I believe to solve this complex problem, vehicles also need to communicate with each other. And then when we allow the driver to drive, we also still need to provide the necessary assistance to drive safely. Because if we know it's a complex environment right now, can the driver handle on his own? We never know. There is something that is going on inside the driver's head that we never know. But whenever it's applicable, we should provide assistance. But then there's another question here. How much of assistance we can provide? Will it become distraction on its own? If the environment is distractive enough right now, so we are about to provide engage in autonomous system to drive, then any assistance from our side, from the system side, does it add to this distraction? Will this, together with the environment, become actually that level where we don't need to let the driver drive? So there just has to be several things sensed, and not only outside of the car, but also with the driver. Maybe we need to build first the baseline and understand the capacity, and then just make the right decision. Where and what has to be added. I don't think we do enough studies today to understand and solve this complex task momentarily. But it's a very important topic to actually get into the driver's head and understand what's going on in there. Because when we say the driver keeps eyes on the road, what the driver is actually doing? Does the driver process what's going on in front of him? Or it's something that is from the morning, from yesterday. Maybe it's an upcoming event, or maybe it's something else. So distraction is complicated subject, and there should be definitely assistance. And I agree to your point that the assistance has to be provided, but we also need to be careful at how much of assistance we want to add.
I'll admit that I'm skeptical of the level 2 approach, any approach that expects a human to be in a vigilance task, doing a backup sort of monitoring of automation for automation failures. I always say, we can't stop you from texting and driving when you're manually in control of the car and supposed to be driving it. So the moment the car looks like it's taking over some of that manual functionality from you, we know the evidence shows people are going to increasingly engage in those non-driving related tasks. And so I can definitely appreciate attempts to take into account context and all of that sort of stuff. But until we're able to take responsibility for the automation and say, I'm confident in this automation, if we're in a situation where we expect the human to be the backup for failed automation, I usually don't like that model. I think the other way around is okay, right? Automation to back up a failed human. I think that works pretty well, but I'm definitely skeptical, and I think most of the evidence suggests that level 2, we ought to be implementing some gaze-based driver monitoring if you expect the human's going to correct an automation failure.
I like what you said, because I could see myself in a very personal use of the car. I turn on the adaptive cruise and lane centering all the time. I mean, I'm one of those users. I want to use it all the time. But I think I also do that because it works as a safety system, just the way you explained. Kind of, for me, I am the main in control, but I want to have that additional layer of safety just in case I get distracted by something, and so I know there is one more chance that the vehicle will brake for me or identify a traffic situation and so on.
I agree. I also like mine, and I view it as more of like a sort of muscle brake than a cognitive brake, right? I'm still attending to everything that's happening when I'm driving, but it's a chance to take my legs back off of the accelerator and rest my legs and take a sort of a physical break, but not a mental one.
Yeah.
I'm curious about what you were saying a minute ago about once the car knows more about the exterior, thanks to all the sensors and everything, because it's equipped with automation, how that could interact with the HMI to actually be smarter. As this technology gets smarter, suddenly if the car knows the weather looks bad and it could rain, could it give you, oh look, you might need your windscreen wipers soon, or you're in a complicated area, let's make the map bigger so you can see there's lots of turnings. Is there any potential for that kind of interaction with the interface and the exterior sensors?
I think there can be. It's not this advanced to what you're referring. I do a lot of automotive driver distraction benchmarking. That's why my examples are like catered towards so many other OEMs and different kind of technologies. Android Auto was something that I noticed some time back, that they have that safety pause once you're like, very much engaged while interacting with the HMI, and it senses that you have spent like good amount of seconds interacting with it. System locks out, and then it forces you to like, take your eyes back on the road. And once you've spent good time focusing on the road, then the HMI sort of unlocks. And I guess like these kind of smart interactions that gauges drivers' real-time behavior is important, and that can help like, define the future where with like, where you are and what external factors are around you in the car too. Yeah.
So we're kind of 10 minutes off the networking reception this evening starting. So does anyone in the audience have any questions for our panelists? I know you're quite a small audience now, but thank you for sticking around this late. We do appreciate it, and you will be rewarded with a good little bit of networking afterwards, having not gone back. So if there's no questions from the audience, I'd like to ask each of our panelists if you have a key takeaway or an actionable insight that you think is relevant to this discussion. It could be something that hasn't come up in this discussion that you think should have done, or a point that you've already said that you'd like to emphasize for the audience to take away as this is a key point, a key takeaway.
Yeah, I really started thinking about the responsibility topic. I think it is very important. And I thought responsibility is something that we don't train autonomous systems for. So we have very advanced systems today, and what we really do, we train them to know the rules, we train them to apply the best practices. People study the situations on the road, develop best practice, and then we put it into the brains of those autonomous systems, but we don't train them to be responsible. Responsibility is something that impacts your decision, and we don't train the systems to be impacted. Instead, what we do, we maintain situations from two sides. One is we maintain distractions, and from the other side, this is an opposite side, we maintain focus. And there has to be a certain ratio. And responsibility comes when you have the perfect ratio, when you're distracted just right enough so you can process everything else. And also there is another point to the distractions. Some of the distractions, they're good. By managing distractions, we are also saying we can distract the driver on purpose from doing something else that is actually harmful. And this is where the system becomes responsible, when it can decide how to distract a driver from doing something harmful and focus on the road. This is where the system takes responsibility of doing something, and we have to be extremely careful about this. So I thought people also have to be more responsible, because look at the autonomous systems. We train them regularly. We update them every year, sometimes every month, with new situations, with new algorithms, with new features, but people put very little time into studying the best practices. Environment changes, driving habits change, new cars are out there, they drive differently. Do we really study how those cars behave around us? Do we pass exams every 3 years? Some people get their driver's license once for the lifetime, right? Some people are not too lucky and they get fined and they are suggested to take the exam to waive the ticket. So those are probably the luckiest one. They have an opportunity to review the rules and train themselves. So I believe we need to put efforts and invest our time to train responsibility, and not only with autonomous systems, but also we need to train drivers. We need to invest there. And this is how our roads will become safer. This is how we all will be able to have this balance of distracted versus focused on the road, because we certainly don't want the drivers keep their focus on the road at all times. Drivers need to change focus from time to time so they don't get asleep, don't get drowsy. This is what we really want. So yeah, I think responsibility was my main takeaway from here. Thanks.
My key takeaway is related to something you said, and I would summarize, like, I think we should try to use this newest technology to solve the newest problems. We tend sometimes to address how we used vehicles 10 years ago or something and expect that. And I have a personal example, again, based on something you also mentioned. I had my previous car was really erring on the side of safety, so kind of not allowing me to do almost anything while I was driving. Probably there was a sensor on the passenger seat knowing, okay, there is no passenger, so if you're operating with the HMI, it's the driver. And many times I ask myself, say, is it making me safer or the other way around? Because there are some things I expected as a user, which is changing my GPS coordinates or something, and then the voice control was not working. And it got me irritated. It got me at some point. And I really asked myself, if I didn't have any of this, I mean, this is making it worse. It's making me more distracted, the inability to do a lot of things and being locked out of basic things that I would expect. If it would just let me do that, I would be done at the traffic light, and I would have changed that. But yeah, so it's just one thought that I have. I mean, I think we also have to understand a lot of the user expectations nowadays. Yeah.
My key takeaway is just following on both of your points is just continuing to do driver distraction research, continuing observing how drivers' behaviors are changing in the car, and what if the subconscious takes over even when their eyes are on the road. So performing those kind of research are important, and then coming up with best practices that our automakers are implementing should be the key. So yeah, thank you.
I agree with what everyone else has said. I teach undergraduate psychology students and undergraduate engineers, and one of the things I try to impart to engineers is that before you start building anything, there's a giant social science project before that process starts to understand who you're building for, what they will do, what they will accept, and so on. And so I think it's really dangerous if we start building things for what we think people ought to do instead of building things for what people will do, in fact, when they're engaging with that system. So we know that people are going to try to text and drive and engage with these systems. That will happen. We know that if you put someone in a level 2 system and say, pay attention, wait for this thing to make a mistake, they're not going to pay attention, right? So knowing that that's how people will behave, we can use that information from the get-go to design safer systems.
Yeah, in addition to that, I think the studies that we can do to understand how to improve safety can also focus on what are the things that you can enable in the vehicle to keep the adoption of new technologies inside the cabin and be able to provide feedback to the user when maybe that user is distracted or when there is a situation that could be dangerous for the user when he's driving. So by providing some kind of feedback, either to audio or tactile feedback or feedback to the seat, the user can start paying attention again to the road rather than the other distractions inside the vehicle. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. That takes us perfectly up to 6 o'clock. So please do thank our panelists and thank you again for sticking around.